Thank you, Katrine, and thank you everyone for coming along this afternoon. I read somewhere that an Icelandic phrase for thinking about things is laying your head down in the water. So hopefully you lay your heads down in the water for a while this afternoon. As Katrine said, I'm quite well known mainly because I'm quite opinionated. And over the years, my opinions have become more and more extreme and arrogant. And I don't think I am extreme and arrogant because I'm British. We're very moderate. But I do it on purpose on the blog because I just want to get reactions. And half the time, I actually disagree with what I write on my blog. But if you don't read the blog, it's Fyrirlestur.com. And I've been writing on there every single day for over 10 years about technology in financial services, which when I started was mainly about regulations and the SWIFT network and how governments need to regulate and deal with the financial crisis. And now it's all about fintech, which is financial technology, which is much cooler, so I can wear jeans and take my tie off. So there you go. I'm involved in lots of different things, including Nordic Finance Innovation, which is a group that started recently covering the 5 countries in the Nordic region. And we've had meetings now in all the countries except for Denmark, which is probably going to happen early next year. And it's aimed to be like the Financial Services Club, which I started 13 years ago, a way to network and engage and talk about the future of the industry, talk about technology and regulations and PSD2 and GDPR and all these things we worry about in a closed network forum of friends. So if you're not aware of Nordic Finance Innovation, then I'd recommend you have a look at our website and maybe get involved because we're doing a lot of things to help the Nordic financial groups and their partners in telcos and media and the corporates to join in and think and understand the future. So I've been given the privilege this afternoon of talking about how to get and keep the digital customer. One of the things I'd recommend finally in my introduction is if you really want to know how to get and keep the digital customer, then download the 11FS FinTech Insiders podcast, which comes out 2 or 3 times a week now, talking about all fintech matters that are current and of interest. And you can listen to that in your drive into work or drive home, and it's quite fun. I'm a non-executive director of 11FS, and I think some of you may know Jason Bates, who was the co-founder of Monzo and Starling, 2 of the most notable British challenger banks, and I can thoroughly recommend that podcast. Finally, I've written 15 books, surprisingly. Only 2 are worthwhile. 13, I think, are really terrible. No, actually 12 were pretty awful. The first one was in 2007, Banking in a Globalized World. I actually wrote books about MiFID and payment services directives, and it's like so dull. So I then got into talking a lot more about digital banking and fintech, and that's what the last 2 books have been about. They're kind of siblings in that digital bank is all about how to change a bank to be digital or how to launch a brand new digital bank. And Value Web is all about how technology is reconstructing the financial system using the mobile network and distributed ledger technologies. You are going to be privileged to be the first audience to see the new cover of my next book. No one's seen it yet except for my wife. My next book is Digital Human. And I'm rather pleased with the cover, to be honest, because I think it's a bit more funky and more exciting, more eye-catching. And Digital Human is based on the fact that I've traveled a lot. In fact, I travel non-stop. People say, where are you based? And I say, British Airways Lounge. It feels that way. And one of my colleagues calls me the fintech tourist because of the fact I travel so much. When I travel, what I like to do is to ideally have a little bit of time to see the country. So I've been to Iceland 5 years ago and spent 3 days touring. And this is a beautiful country, particularly when winter is coming, as they say in Game of Thrones. Right now, I can't think of many countries I haven't been to. And when I visit a city or a place, I normally try and go into the museums or the churches or the mosques to find out the history of those countries. And Digital Human is kind of a reflection of morphing 2 things, which is what I've learned in my travels and what I believe in how technology is changing the future of everything. The subtitle, The Fourth Revolution in Humanity, includes everyone. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, as well as Value Web and Digital Bank. And I guess the real thing that drives me to blog every day and to talk about these things every day is I wake up every morning with one question. What's the future? I sometimes have another question in my head with similar initials, to be honest, but it's a present. When you're presenting about something, no one wants to know what's going on right now, because we all know what's going on right now. We want to know what's going to happen next, and what should we do about it. And that's what drives me, because that gives you a chance to get one up on the competition and one up on your investments, because you can strategically know much better where you're going if you focus on this question: what's the future? But to know what's going on in the future, you have to know what's going on in the past. And in my travels around mosques and churches and museums, I've discovered so much that led to a conclusion which I haven't seen anyone else make yet. So I'm not saying I'm the only person who has this conclusion, because I've seen things that are touching on the same themes. But I thoroughly believe that we are in a revolution of humanity, the fourth revolution of humanity. And this is a fundamental shift, which means that we're not living in a world of banking as usual with technology making it faster and cheaper and smoother. We're living in a world that's reimagining financial services with technology for the planet Earth. It is as big as that. It is a revolution. It's not just part of developing things to keep up, banking as usual. It's banking as unusual. And I thought I'd talk through these revolutions of humanity, because it positions what we're going through right now rather well when you think about the three historical revolutions of humanity. The first being, obviously, becoming human. The fact is that when Homo sapiens first appeared on Earth about 150 to 200,000 years ago, there were many forms of human on Earth. And this I discovered in the cradle of humankind, which is just outside Johannesburg, 50 kilometers north. And it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site that's tracking and tracing the origins of humankind, dating back 7 million years, which is the oldest fossilized form of human they've found so far, that came from Ethiopia. Most of the fossils they're finding in the cradle of humankind are dated to about 2 or 3 million years ago. And every day they're learning something new, because they keep finding new things in the ground. And one of the key things they found is that when we first appeared, there are around 7 forms of human on Earth. There's Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and Homo sapiens. And the question that it raises in your mind, or in my mind, is why are we the only ones left? What happened to all those other human forms? Why didn't they carry on existing through to today? Why are they extinct? And the answer came to me by picking up the book by Professor Yuval Harari, which is called Sapiens, which, if you've read it, is a fantastic book. I'm not so sure about his newest one, Homo Deus, but Sapiens, I think, is really informative. And one of the key things that it says in the book is that all those other forms of humans lived a little bit like apes. And apes live in small groups where they have a dominant alpha male that controls the group. And when the group gets to a certain size where there are more than one alpha male, the group splits into 2, because you cannot have 2 alpha males. There's only one alpha male. All the others are beta males. You beat them up. So as a result, the other forms of humans, the Homo habilis, the Homo erectus, Neanderthal, etc., lived in these groups of about 25 to 30 individuals. They couldn't get bigger than 100 individuals, because that would be too many males. Whereas Homo sapiens had one distinctive, unique feature, which is the larynx, and the fact that we learned to communicate and talk and have a language that we could start to share and imagine and tell stories to each other and create shared beliefs. So we could share beliefs about how the world looked, and that enabled us to live in groups that were far larger, because we were talking to each other. And so the alpha male may still want to beat everyone up, but you'd talk to him and calm him down. So, as a result, we lived in groups of hundreds. So when Neanderthals came and attacked Homo sapiens, we just beat them because of our numbers. And that's the reason why it's just Homo sapiens left in this room, apart from the 1 or 2 Neanderthals. And this is a really important foundation of humankind. It hasn't gone away. This is the most important thing about the first revolution of humanity, the creation of shared beliefs, which have morphed into religions and other things. But I think it's really well illustrated by Europe and how Europe's changed. This is Europe in 1600. 500 years ago. And my wife is Polish. She likes this Europe. Poland was the biggest country in Europe. It was huge. And as you can see, there were some other places around. Scotland separated from England, as it still is today. And the Ottoman Empire below Poland, and Sweden above Poland, and the Muscovites to the east. In fact, Poland was at war with those three territories throughout this period. So this is Europe in 1700. And during the 18th century, the Hussars of Poland, the cavalry, beat the Swedish, but in doing so, opened the opportunity for the Muscovites to come in from the east and obliterate Poland. By 1800. It disappeared. And by 1900, Germany's taking over everything, as it still is. And by today, Poland's come back, and it's now been back as a country. I believe you guys were part of Denmark till 1944. Now you're not. Now, the reason why that's important is that that shared belief creates a world that you think is one way, when it actually is nothing like that at all. There are no borders in this world. We just created them as shared beliefs. That's how we live. That's how we structure things. There are no banks. Landesbanki, Islandsbanki, Allianz Bank, they don't exist, except in contract law and in brands and in the way we think and believe that they are trustworthy because they're regulated by governments. And this is a fundamental foundation of humanity, the first one. And each revolution in humanity, we create something new that enables us to live and work and deal with each other harmoniously. And this was the first revolution that enabled that to happen, that created the dominant form of human, Homo sapiens. So I'll come back to this because this is rather important. It's the foundation of humanity. The second revolution in humanity was when we became civilized. And this is the fintech tourist outside Baalbek in Lebanon. And this is an ancient Roman ruins of a city, which is fascinating to visit. And in the museum there, they showed various discussions around the ancient civilizations in the Middle East, such as this city of Eridu, which is the capital of Mesopotamia, 10,000 years ago. In fact, only again realizing in my travels, having had that first revolution of humanity, humans gradually started to move towards the north and created what's called the Fertile Crescent of civilizations, the Phoenicians, the Babylonians, Sumeria, and it was stretching from Iraq across to Israel. And it's quite interesting here in the downtown Reykjavik, outside my hotel, there's a museum presentation of old Reykjavik. And the first thing you see as you walk down the stairs into the museum is the history of how humans moved out of Africa and went around all the continents of the world 12,000 years ago. Well, this all stems from becoming civilized, which is 12,000 years ago in this Fertile Crescent, when people from Africa moved north. Now, the important thing about this is that during this period, most of the cities were civilized and had structures based on kings and temples with priests with shared beliefs, and a lot of production of goods and crops by farmers. And in this particular part of the world, as you can imagine, it's all well and good when you have a great year and have plenty of rain and produce an abundance of crops. But in bad years and drought, people die and they starve. And the priests and the kings were wondering, what do we do to overcome this issue of farmers not storing their crops in abundance in the good years to cover the bad years? So they invented money. It just created out of thin air by the priests and the king to say, this is valuable. You can believe this is valuable because it gives you access to things you never had access to before. And this is a vase that survived the Gulf War in Baghdad in Iraq that shows this ancient practice of the farmers taking their crops to the priests and picking up a shekel, the ancient Sumerian shekel, which once they had it, they could go inside the temple and have intimacy with the goddess on earth, Inanna, who was represented by the ladies of the city, which means, yes, the oldest profession in the world is prostitution, and the second oldest is accountancy. Because money was invented purely to give access to entertainment and fun and things that you didn't get otherwise so easily. And it's a fundamental foundation of humanity. The second one, that we created money as a value exchange mechanism we could trust that gave us, in return for goods and products, services, and other things that we needed. And so it broke through that barter system and created a great way of actually creating an immediate trusted store and share of value. Third revolution in humanity is when we went into the steam age, the industrial age, and started to go around the world on steamships and steam trains. The oldest patent for anything that was steam-based is a steam-based pump that took water out of the mines in 1606. The last patent for something steam-based was a steam-based aeroplane in 1933, still used by Ryanair today. So it feels, anyway. But you can travel around the world suddenly and move from cities of thousands of people to countries of millions of people. And metropolises started to grow, like London and New York, because of that reason, because they became the centers dominating trade globally during this period. And as we created trade globally, we needed some way to trust how to trade with each other globally across borders. And the way in which that was created and invented, bearing in mind that we now had money, is to create something that could be a store of value that could be trusted by counterparties called a bank. So banks were created as regulated and licensed government entities that could be trusted as stores of value and money across borders and could issue paper checks and paper notes that you knew were good for the money. And therefore, you didn't have to go around with big bags of gold to do trade, but you could say, look, I've got a check here from the bank. You can trust it. In fact, I can put a check in the post, and you can trust it. It's a radical innovation, still used by most American banks today. And I know that because I recently got a check from an American bank for, it was actually $20,000. Woohoo! It's like, wow. And I put it into my bank, and my bank manager said, ooh, you've put a big check in, Chris. Sorry about that. It's like, why? It's good news. And he said, no, it's going to take 28 days to process because it's got to go through the SWIFT network, and we've got to get the funds in our account before you can have them in your account. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to charge you $200 to do that. You know, thanks. That's really nice. You know, in this internet age, it's ridiculous that we have something that's so slow and expensive, still used as a mechanism of trade and commerce. We have to replace it. And we know we are. I mean, we know that checks are disappearing in some countries and being replaced by real-time, immediate payments. And, you know, I think one of the key things here, and this is my biggest question in my own head, is as I look at things like cryptocurrencies and I see the criticism that all the bankers make of Bitcoin bad, blockchain good, and everyone says that, in banking anyway. I go, actually, Bitcoin good, but not yet. Bitcoin 3.0, or whatever it will be, will probably create a global digital currency for trade that we need in this global internet platform connected age. Because if everybody's connected globally through the network, it would be ridiculous to have to take funds out of the network and put funds back into the network to go across borders. So fiat currencies are going to be slightly challenged in this new age of digital. It's a revolution, bearing in mind that this is not just business as usual. This is my wife. She's a bit blank. It's actually because it's another illustration of the ridiculousness of our current age of banking that's still based heavily in the industrial era. You know, most banks were created for the physical distribution of paper in a localized network, whereas what we want now is the digital distribution of data in a globalized network. Most banks were focused on buildings and humans, whereas now we're focused on software and servers. And the illustration here is that I went with my wife to open a bank account for our 2 children. And as we went through the onboarding process, which is always fun, they came to the point and said, well, your wife does not exist. I said, she's sitting here. You know. And they said, well, actually, we just can't prove who she is, because she's had children, therefore hasn't traveled for a while, therefore doesn't have a passport. And equally, none of the utility bills are in her name, they're in my name, because I've got the main bank accounts, and we haven't combined accounts yet. And there's no proof of where she lives, except for a bank statement. But having said that, we need more than that. She doesn't exist. I ended up having to pay £300 for a notary to say that she does exist, and this is her driving license. But it's a Polish driving license that British banks don't trust, so they had to get a notary in to say, yes, she really does exist, okay. The digital age is demanding that we get rid of all these stupid industrial era paper processes and replace them with digital structures. But then we have to ask ourselves the one question that most people don't, which is what actually is going on here? Because I see an awful lot of banking people saying, we've done digital. Look at our mobile app. That's all they've done. You've done digital, it's a mobile app. I saw a survey the other day from CGI that said 80% of bank leadership's team people who were surveyed in this survey and research thought they had done digital. And yet, it's just a revolution that's only just starting. What do you mean you've done digital, you stupid people? I saw another one the other day from Gartner. 76% of bank executives surveyed by Gartner for their research say that digital will mean no change to the business model of banking. Really? In a revolution of everything? When almost every other industry is being decimated by digital? Are you stupid enough to really think there's no change to your business model? There's a radical change to the business model, which I'm going to present to you, in terms of the business model is completely different. But really what we have here is that most banking hallways at the leadership level, and I know it's not true here, I'm talking of everywhere else except for Iceland, honestly, just don't actually talk about the thing that cannot be named. What is digital? Because they think it's obvious. And it's not obvious. It's a fundamental revolution that's taking everything and challenging everything and making sure it's banking as unusual, not banking as usual. It's not faster, cheaper, smoother banking. It's a rethinking, a reimagining, a reinvention of finance. And we see that in other industries that get it, because they've got an industrial era age companies that were very highly valued being replaced by the digital companies, GAFAM, as some call it now, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, which you missed. Microsoft. Microsoft cool? No, not really. Millennials know Microsoft. But, one of the key things about this slide, and you may not have even thought about it, or it hasn't even struck you, is every single one of those ones in green that are now the most highly valued companies in America have payments licenses. Because when you're digital, commerce is very important to your structure of your business model and how you do business. And then you move into credit and lending and other services, which means that they're not going to replace banks. Do not think ever that these guys will replace banks, but they are going to eat away all the fat margins of payments and credit and lending, and they already are in most economies. And the other thing you notice about these companies is that they are platforms that connect people who have things with people who need things. And because they're platforms using APIs and open collaboration services, they do very little themselves except provide the APIs and the platforms in a marketplace that connects people who have things with people who need things. As a result, the Airbnbs, the Ubers, the Facebooks, the Instagrams have very few people compared to their industrial era counterparts who did everything and made everything and distributed everything and looked after and controlled everything. Whereas platform companies make, control, and distribute nothing. They own no rooms, they own no cars, they own no media. Their community on their marketplace creates their content. A fundamentally important point about platform companies. Everyone else does the work, you get the revenues and the high valuations. And we are seeing this coming through in financial services with the PayPals and the Stripes of this world, which you did mention. But not financial, it's Chinese. I'm not having a go. I liked what you said, by the way, which is being translated nicely by Daniela. Thank you. But I like the fact that we're seeing a new age of lean financial services based on technology platforms and marketplaces that are open, collaborative through APIs and apps. And this is the fundamental shift that I think we'll see over the next decade coming through quite heavily to hit a lot of the large financial players, particularly those that have legacy systems, because they won't be able to compete. You cannot compete with an agile, customer-centric, data-structured, open, collaborative marketplace if you're closed, proprietary, and a control freak. And equally, when you look at Stripe, which is just, actually it's now 6 years old, $22 million of value per employee based on the valuation at the end of 2016, compared to $1 million per employee of JP Morgan Chase, the highest valued bank in the world. So what is this revolution we're going through? Well, 10 years ago, I wrote a blog called Banking as a Service, that talked about the idea that I could take any APIs from any players and integrate them into my bank that's personalized to me through plug-and-play technologies. I didn't realize 10 years ago that I was a bit ahead of the time, because now everyone's talking about banking as a marketplace, banking as a service, banking as a platform. But this is an idea that's 10 years old. The idea that I could take thousands of different companies with APIs and apps, plug and play, and integrate them into my personalized financial structure. And this is what we can do today, and this is what corporates can do, this is what asset managers can do, fund managers can do, retail customers can do, if they want to, is take the open-sourced, open-banked world and create the service that they desire to have for them. Rather than relying on one intermediary to control everything for them, they can take thousands of APIs and build their own bank. Now, they won't do that. But what they will do is they'll look to their financial partners to get the best of breed services for them. And that's going to be a fundamental shift and demand of customers, whether retail or corporate. So what is the business model of a bank? It's very simple. It's a back office that looks after products and services and innovates, ideally, and differentiates. A middle office that connects the back office to the front office and processes all the transactions right first time, every time, never lets a payment go through that shouldn't go through. And a front office that's really good with customers, really nice people. They're customer intimate. And then we have lots of lines of business because we've grown bank assurance over the last decade. Now, I've spent some time, as you can tell by my wrinkles, doing work around the industry. And in the 1990s, I used 2 books to primarily look at banks' business models. One was called The Disciplines of Market Leaders by Michael Tricky and Fred Wiersma. And this is still a good book, so it's still worth reading if you haven't read it. And it talks about this retailing, processing, manufacturing structure of any company, not just a bank. And so this is the typical structure of any company. They retail, they process, they manufacture. But they're probably only going to be good at one of those things. They're probably only going to be exceptional at one of those things. And the other 2 will be average. And certainly when you think about most companies, even someone like Apple, I would claim that their product is pretty amazing. But I often find their updates through their middle office incredibly frustrating. So I don't think their middle office is as good as it should be. But their front office is pretty good with Genius bars. The other book was Re-engineering the Corporation by Michael Hammer and James Champy. And I spent a lot of time during the 1990s trying to get banks and insurance companies to transform. But they ended up doing incremental improvement because it's far less risky and it's far easier, faster, cheaper insurance and banking rather than radically different insurance and banking. And the idea of re-engineering the corporation is that the back office is where all the products sit, the middle office is all the processes, and the front office is the people. And the front office is the lovely cuddly part that actually is the most important part because that's where the moments of truth exist. And so my contention was to transform, you should look at the moments of truth and your human connections between your staff and your customers and map those and then build the business processes once you've mapped those and then work out what products are needed once you've worked out the processes and the engagements of moments of truth. Instead, most of my clients went the other way around, and that's the reason why they ended up doing incremental improvement, because they just focused on product and how to get more product to the customer. So an inside-out view rather than an outside-in view. And that's an important thing I'm saying now, because I really think today, in this digital age, we have to work from the outside in. And if we continue to be product-centric, pushing products through channels, we're going to fail. That doesn't work anymore in this millennial age. I think, again, you reinforced that in your presentation. Your products go through platforms that provide experiences. And that's what we have today. That's what the customer wants, is demanding that I have an amazing user experience, frictionless, easy, that doesn't try and push product on me, but enables me to think smarter, better, and live financially well. And we can see those experiences from the companies I've already referenced, like I need to go somewhere. A fantastic experience is getting an app where I can get a driver anytime, anywhere, any country almost, and get home, and not have to think about, do I have local currency, do I have change? I mean, I fly around the world all the time. I use Uber all the time, and I just love it because wherever I am, for example, I was in Dallas last week. and went to an out-of-town store to buy cowboy boots. And I could get out of town quite easily because I could find a taxi. Could I get back into town with a taxi? I was on an interstate highway, off the highway, in a local shop. No way. But now I can because I just call an Uber. Same with Airbnb. You know, when you're looking at flying around the world and you need a room, where better to find a room than someone's empty house, which I know is a problem here. It's a problem everywhere. People are buying houses and flats just to rent them out on Airbnb as an investment, which is, I think, a problem. And I'm not saying these business models are not flawed. Uber and Airbnb have quite a lot of flaws, as I think we know from the culture of Uber in particular. But it is a platform-based company that's changing the user experience, and this is the critical factor. The first fintech I ever heard present anywhere was on the 30th of March 2005, when we had Richard Duval, who is the co-founder of Zopa, talking at my London-based financial services club. And he talked about an eBay for money, connecting people who have money with people who need money. And so people who want to buy something like a new car could be connected through their platform to people who had money, and the algorithms, software, and servers would work out the risk and the interest rates. And the incentive for the investor is that they get a higher return on their money, and the incentive for the borrower is they pay a lower rate on their lending. It's a fantastic idea, but when he presented it, everyone in the room went, that acronym I used at the start, they had no idea what the hell he was talking about. An eBay for money, connecting people who have money with people who need money? Never heard of it, no idea what that is. It's peer-to-peer lending, which now we know and is grown and is more understood. I'm not saying it's more accepted, but it's very highly accepted in the UK. So much so that 12 years later, in February of 2017, Zopa enabled the borrowing of £2 billion through their platform, almost $3 billion. And that's 4% of the UK personal credit marketplace. And it's doubling year on year, so it could be 8% next year, 16% in 2019, a third of the market, 2020. That would be ridiculous, but also phenomenal, because that's what we're seeing, which is the easy targets of the high margin basis points differential of lending being collapsed through algorithms. You have to have a high basis points of borrowing and saving when you are a physical company, because you have so much overhead. A digital company has no overhead. They're lean, or they should be. So really what's happening with the front office, middle office, and back office is that the front office is all apps connecting devices through the Internet of Things via APIs in the middle office to enable those things to transact with the services that they need from the back office, which actually is all based on analytics of the data to get a better knowledge grasp of what these things and this customer is doing. What things does the customer own? What things have they authorized to transact on their behalf? What things do we need to alert the customer to? How can we proactively, on a proximity-based analysis, give the customer more knowledge and information enrichment about their financial lifestyle? That back office is where the real competition is taking place, because that data that's locked into an awful lot of legacy is the air that we will be breathing for competition. It's not oil. You know, some people say data is the new oil. Oil is a fossil fuel that's dying. Air. Data is air. It's the ability to breathe and breathe easily by competing better because we have more knowledge of the customer than anyone else. And right now, banks do have more knowledge of the customer than almost anyone else except for Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, which is where their opportunity is and their threat. So the front office has moved into devices that are social and mobile and very soon things, lots of things. And my favorite example of a front office app, I've got many, but the one I'm going to pick on because of its virality is Venmo. And Venmo is now the most successful social mobile payment system in the USA, thanks to a large extent by the fact that PayPal brought Venmo via Braintree and turbocharged that system. They ratcheted it up. But if you don't know how Venmo was created, it was created over a weekend by Ikram and Andy, who were two 26-year-old friends who were at university together. And Ikram went to visit Andy for the weekend and forgot his wallet. let's write code as an app, because we both use PayPal, so I can pay you through weekend, Andy, for what I'm spending, or asking you to pay for on my behalf. Both use PayPal. So they literally wrote the code over a weekend because he forgot his wallet. And now they're laughing because they're millionaires. They could have been billionaires if they'd waited a bit longer to sell out, but they sold out a year later for $26.2 million. Not bad for a weekend's work. And not bad for creating one of the most radically fast-growing systems in the USA. But later on, I'll come back to say that this is actually not that impressive. But it's impressive if you're American. So the front office is all about an app and having things that are viral, connected, social. And because it's viral, connected, and social, it grows really phenomenally quickly. And it can grow really phenomenally quickly and be updated very quickly because it's all being powered by middle office APIs. And it's those APIs that are really driving the change because it's open and collaborative. Uber could not exist if Google did not have an API for its maps. Equally, Venmo could not exist if it couldn't connect into a lot of other social networks, which it does through its APIs. APIs all over the place. Everywhere in financial services, I'm seeing APIs being launched and delivered and connected and available. And I think the most impressive one is Stripe, mainly because it is one of the biggest unicorns in fintech, and mainly because it's been doubling in value year on year since it was launched in 2011. But most impressive, I think, because it was created by teenagers. John and Patrick Collinson, the creators of Stripe, were 21 and 19 years old when they came up with the idea. Now they're the world's youngest billionaires. And they're smiling as well, not surprisingly, really. And it's because they created something that can get a small business online being able to take payments within about 8 minutes. Just plug and play API services, really simple. Whereas it would take about a week through a traditional bank, particularly in the USA again. So APIs in the middle office are transformational. But the real competition is in this air that we breathe in the back office, this data, that we know we should have it in the cloud, and yet we've locked it into a lot of lines of business structures. And equally, we know that what's happening right now is the big ticket item being artificial intelligence and machine learning. And yet AI is impossible in a customer context if you have dirty data locked into lots of legacy. I see a lot of banks doing AI in risk and fraud, because that's areas they can apply it to, even with a spaghetti structure in the back office. But you won't be able to compete with the Amazons and the Facebooks and the Ant Financials of this world if the back office is locked in legacy data that's segregated. You have to have an enterprise customer view. And equally, AI is moving at a speed that's phenomenal. 5 years ago, Google were talking about how their machines using learning could recognize a cat from YouTube, even though it had no idea what a cat was. And from that photograph, they still probably don't back then. Facebook, 2 years ago, saying their facial recognition system is more accurate than your eyeballs. Your human eye can recognize a face at about a 92.3% ratio of positives, whereas Facebook's getting higher rates than that. In fact, Facebook knows more about your friends and family from their artificial intelligence than you do, which is a bit scary, but at the same time, it's there. The Google teaches AIs to invent their own crypto language. It was quite an amusing one in that they did this experiment. It was after Google's machines beat the Go player, where they had 3 programs and said to the first program to talk to the second program without the third program knowing what they were talking about. And after about 10 minutes, the first 2 programs were chatting away quite happily, and the third going. And so, so were the Google engineers. They had no idea what they were talking about, which is a bit cybernet. That's a bit scary as well. And if you really want to get scary, let's talk about AI in banking. So JP Morgan had this headline earlier this year that their artificial intelligence machines on their wholesale corporate contracts could analyze enough data in 1 second that previously took 360,000 hours of legal work. And that's fantastic because you can sack all the lawyers. It's going to change everything. But equally, there's a lot of people talking about sacking all the bankers because they're just abacuses. John Cryan Spoke at a conference I was at last month, and in fact it's in the headlines again yesterday saying the same thing, which is half of all of Deutsche Bank's back office workers will be redundant within the next 10 years because they're just abacuses that can be replaced by machines, which obviously is hugely inspirational and motivational for Deutsche Bank's people. Congratulations, Mr. Cryan. But it's true, about a third of bank jobs are going to disappear over the next decade because they can be, software is eating the world. Why do we need highly paid, expensive investment bankers and traders when their jobs are done better by machines and algorithms? Why do we need tellers in branches when we don't need branches anymore? We need service and genius bars, but we don't need the old transactional branches, which is why a lot of branches have closed down. And in fact, my favorite comment of all, looking at fintech imagination, is again from millennials. In fact, every example I've given so far is millennials. But I interviewed Nicholas Adelbath, one of the co-founders of Klarna, for the book Value Web. And in the middle of the interview, I said, so what were you doing before starting Klarna? He said, oh, me and the other founder, we were flipping burgers in Burger King. Now they're flipping billionaires. It's like, this is the entrepreneurial age. This is the age where anyone can take tech and launch a new business and virally grow that business to scale overnight through an API. And that's important because that's what fintech is all about. That's the reason why this is such a cool area. That's the reason why it's taken off so rapidly. Because from 2005, when I heard Zopa, through 2009, when I talked about banking as a service with plug-and-play APIs that allow me to create my own bank, we've seen thousands of startup companies getting billions of dollars of investment to tackle the inefficiencies of the KYC onboarding and other processes of the banking system. $100 billion invested in just the last 4 years. And most recently, nearly all the investment is coming out of Asia into these new companies. And fintech isn't one big bucket of tech. It's lots of granular levels of technology, from insurtech and wealth tech and reg tech to AI, machine learning, mobile wallets, payments, distributed ledger technology, and blockchain. There's so many technologies that are impacting. And they're impacting, obviously, in the retail banking space. And most of us talk about consumer banking change with technology. But there's actually just as much, if not more, change in insurance, in regulatory compliance, in wealth management and investment markets. Every part of the financial system that can be changed by a startup with technology is being changed by a startup with technology. And you end up with 1,000 or more startups that are doing one thing really well, competing with a bank that does 1,000 things averagely. And the reason the bank's doing 1,000 things averagely is they're trying to develop all these things that these companies that do one thing really well do internally themselves, which is why open sourcing is so important. Because we have to work out what are the 1,000 things out there that we could work with that would give our customers the best experience. And let's partner and bring them into the bank rather than trying to compete and develop our own average services against them. Which is what we've done historically. I mean, it really brings it home to me when I hear people talking about their vision as fintech startups. So we have a fintech startup in the UK called Loot, which is a bank. It's a bank that's particularly appealing to millennials because it's been created by a millennial. And it was created by a millennial because he was frustrated with how his bank apps worked. His bank apps, because they were based on legacy transactional systems, only told him what he had spent. And his friends all had the same problem. Because when you're young, you don't really need to know what you spent. You need to know what you can spend. What can I do this weekend? How much can I afford to enjoy myself with this weekend? So this particular guy is Ollie Perdue. And at 21 years old, he dropped out of university to launch a bank. Could you imagine doing that when you were at school or university? The world is unlimited in this age of open sourcing marketplaces and partnership structures, because anybody can open a bank at any age. He's now 24, and that bank is growing pretty quickly because it's getting word of mouth about cash flow forecasting and visualization and personal financial management tools that are not available from other UK banks. His actual cost of onboarding a customer is less than €1 per customer. So we kind of get to the conclusion of this digital transformation of financial services. That it is a transformation. It's not an evolution of business as usual. It is being reimagined by millennials who don't care about how the system works because they're breaking the system with technology, and they have a lot of investment support to do that. And it's creating the robo-advisory, robo-service of the future, which kind of says, is this how we want to deal with our money in the next decade? And I'm not too sure, if I'm honest, because if I woke up one morning expecting my balance on my app to say, Chris, you've got 10,000 euros, which is what I had yesterday, and it says, Chris, you've got minus 25,000 euros. I think I'd want to talk to someone about it. I don't want to talk to him. So human advisors, I think, are going to be around for a long time. Branches, I think, will be around for a long time, but not for what they used to do, which is transactions, but for what they will do in the future, which is trust. And although I might trust my apps and my technologies, when they don't work and the processing systems break down, the humans are the people who then end up having to sort out the exceptions. And that's when we need human connections. And this came home to me with CheBanca, which is a bank in Italy, where Roberto Ferrari, who's got 50 branches at the time that I was talking to him, said that his branches exist as his marketing investment. They are not there for transactions or advice, although they will do transactions and advice, but they're there for trust. And the main reason is that where there is a physical representation of the bank is getting 2.5 times more deposits and assets under management than where there is not. So it's a marketing investment for trust that allows us to give humans to sort out the exceptions and also to engage at a level where we feel, particularly because the psychology of money is different to the psychology of everything else. If Facebook lose an update or a photograph, I don't need to go and break into their branch because I'm not that bothered. But if I lost 30,000 euros overnight and I had no idea why, I want to talk to someone. Now, you may say, but I can talk to someone on video, high-definition Skype, that's fine too. But I still think people will want to talk to people and eyeball them. But the main job of a bank, with this big reduction in buildings and humans, is to act as my curator of services, to look at the 1,000 companies in that marketplace and say, these are the ones that will give you the best experience. Stop developing, stop building, start partnering, start collaborating. So I moved towards a conclusion of the fourth revolution and what the business model of the bank is. And I was at a February meeting in Norway where Nordea introduced their marketplace of partners. And one particular partner is a little fintech startup in Norway called Spiff. And the head of innovation of Nordea said, so I'm pleased to announce today our joint venture partnership with Spiff. Over to you. And the CEO of Spiff got up on stage, and his first line was, my 3-year-old son likes to play with dinosaurs. So do we. It's like really respectful. Thank you, Carl. Mind you, he is 24. You allow him to be like that. But I feel this sometimes, because I walk into a lot of banks' boardrooms to brief them on fintech and digital, and quite often they're going to sit there and say, I don't see why this is important. I actually was in one board meeting, I still remember it, where halfway through, the head of human resources walked out, and I heard them muttering, I didn't expect to be in a technology meeting. It's like, but you're a technology company. Digital bank, half digital. And normally when I walk into those bank boardrooms, I'm actually engaging with a group of people that look like this, they're kind of old. not quite dinosaurs. But it doesn't have diversity, for a start. It doesn't meet what I see as the sort of things I see in fintechs. I think of fintech as being a parent-child relationship, where the child is the tech that wants to break everything, and the fin is the parent who's trying to say, well, here's your playroom, do not go near that vase. There are things that the techs and the fintechs and the millennials learn as they try to break the system and realize some of these rules exist for a very good reason, because we've had a financial crash 10 years ago. In fact, we had another one 100 years ago, and we had one every 7 years that's a bit smaller, not so worrying, but we try and avoid them as a rule. But these guys, and I kind of know that they're a bit like this because Accenture did an analysis of the bank's boardroom CVs of the biggest banks of the world. And the statistic that I think is amazing is that 94% of the bank's boardroom leaders have never had any technology exposure in their life as a job. So only 6% actually have had any professional role in dealing with technology as a CIO or working for a telecommunications or technology company. That's a bit of a sad indictment. 94% of banks are run by bankers. And you may say, but banks should be run by bankers. But they won't be digital banks if they're only run by bankers, because it's only half of the equation. The other half is digital. 4 out of 5 banks of the world have pretty much nobody in the leadership team who understands technology, which means that they will never get digital transformation. This is the reason why 76% think there's no change to the business model of banking. It's just banking as usual, cheaper, faster, and smoother. This is the reason why 80% think they've done digital because they've rolled out a mobile app. They're getting it wrong. Digital is a cultural business transformation program, getting everybody to understand that the world has changed fundamentally, as has the business model of the bank. One of the things I keep banging on about on the blog, which I think those who read it will know, is that the legacy issue in most banks is because the leadership teams continuously dodge the bullet of replacing core systems. And yet, because they've done that, the longer it's gone on, the higher the risk, the higher the cost to change those core systems, because they're melded into the fabric and foundation of the bank. 92% of big banks have mainframe systems running from the last century on IBM, and half of the American banks have those systems written in COBOL and now can't find programmers who can maintain them because the programmers are all dying. This is a problem. The mixture of legacy systems and legacy leadership. Legacy leadership that doesn't see what the change is. And I can talk to you a lot about different banks, but there are very few banks that really get this. And those that do, like BBVA or DBS or USAA, are banks that have people in the leadership team who have had professional technology experience and understand digital in their soul, and they're passionate about how to change the bank to be digital, because they know it's cultural change, it's not technology change. So right now, I think we're on the cusp of a massive decade of change. And in 2027, I firmly believe that banks that are still proprietary with legacy systems will be extinct. They will be acquired. They will be merged. They will no longer be fit for purpose, especially when they're competing with so many players. And these players, what's interesting is they could all get together and create a bank themselves through collaboration and partnership. A global bank by just saying all these guys shake hands and agree to work together. That would be interesting. And yet everything I've talked about so far as a digital revolution is pretty much looking the wrong way. I keep saying that there's a great line from The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, which is, it's not the fittest, the fastest, or the most intelligent who survive. It's the ones who are the most adaptable to change. And you may think, well, we are adapting to change, Chris, because you talked about everything about how to adapt to change through open sourcing, marketplaces, structures. But are you adapting to the right change? Because I think there's a left field innovator's dilemma, which is coming out of Africa and Asia. And it's financial inclusion. The fact that because we have a global network, we can include everybody in the network cheaply and easily. And so across Africa right now, we're seeing the mobile network transforming countries into connected countries. McKinsey estimate that $3.7 trillion of increased productivity per year will be made available through the productivity of financial inclusion by 2025. $3.7 trillion a year from the African countries in particular, and also Latin America, Philippines, Indonesia, countries where when you're doing physical distribution of paper, it's too expensive to include those people. But now it's digital distribution of data, we can include everybody. And I see that specifically, not just in Africa, where on every 3 or 5 meters, there's someone who's an ATM called a mobile representative who can do cash in, cash out, microloans, micro savings. But I think China illustrates it really well. China last year had $5.5 trillion of mobile app payments. America had 112 billion. 50 times more mobile payments in China than in America, because America is a legacy economy, still using magnetic stripe and paper checks. Whereas China's leapfrogged all that. They didn't have this infrastructure of debit and credit cards. So when mobile apps came out with QR codes from Alipay and WeChat, everyone's just gone fantastic. I spent a week in Hangzhou with Ant Financial, who form a major case study in the new book. It's 25% of the new book. is a case study on Ant Financial. And the reason I did it is that they're the only company in the world that's focused on this theme of financial inclusion of everybody on the planet through the mobile network. They really get it, and they're making it happen. But when I got to Hangzhou, first day, I was staying at the Holiday Inn Express. And I got to the Holiday Inn Express, there's no restaurant or bar, and in my room there was a fridge with nothing in it. So the first thing I do is, as I do, normally I think, oh, I'll go and buy some things from the local store. So I go to the local store, I fill up my basket of goods, I get to the checkout, and I show them my chip and PIN card. And then they go, contactless? Nope. So it's either QR code or cash. Well, the QR code is only available on the apps that only Chinese citizens can use, so it's cash. So I leave my basket of goods, go to the hotel, ask for the local ATM, and the nearest ATMs are only local Chinese banks that don't recognize international withdrawals. So I couldn't get any cash. I starved for the first day. Then Ant Financial fed me, so I was happy. But if you're not aware of what Ant Financial is doing, they're making partnerships globally with so many different players to become the technology inside the mobile apps of the world. And so Globe Telecom in the Philippines and Indonesia, you've got Ascent Money in Thailand, you've got Paytm in India, which has 250 million users today. Ant Financial's got 530 million. They have an ambition to have 2 billion users by 2025, and I think they're underestimating that. I think they'll have more than that. Right now, they can process about 125,000 transactions per second with fraud and all the security and risk metrics built in through artificial intelligence. When I talk to them, they're starting on their 5th generation systems architecture, and this is a 14-year-old company. So they throw away their systems every 3 or 4 years and start again. Could you imagine doing that? Every 3 or 4 years, you re-architect the bank. That's what these guys do. Their aim on the 5th generation is to support 2 billion users making 100 billion transactions a day, 1 million transactions per second. They really get it. And they are not a financial company, they're a technology company that provides their technology capabilities with local partners. So the idea is that Paytm and Ascent and Globe are the local representations of Ant's technologies and experiences that they offer to these partners to take as much or as little as they want. It's a fantastic company. And most surprisingly, one of the most environmentally focused, looking for a better planet companies that I've met in the world, which you kind of don't expect necessarily from China, but that's the focus, making a better planet, a better society, a better Earth. So that's kind of the digital revolution. For me, the digital revolution is about inclusion. And if out of Africa and Asia, we can get micro-savings, micro-loans, micro-payments, micro-everything through the mobile network, and do it through systems that are transacting data in trillions of amounts per day, then that, to me, is the innovator's dilemma, that suddenly I don't need a bank to do financial services. I need a bank to do banking because they're regulated and licensed, but to do payments and credit, I can use Ant Financial with local language flavors. Maybe. In conclusion, we've gone through 4 revolutions of humanity, and in each revolution, we've changed the way in which we do trade and commerce, particularly because we've gone from villages in the first revolution to cities in the second, to metropolises in the third, to global connected planet in the fourth, which is what we are today. And becoming human to forming civilizations, becoming industrial to becoming digital, has each time created a new value structure for trade commerce. And so in the first one, we had the shared beliefs. In the second, we have this invention of money. The third, we invented banks. And I think here, based on data, we're inventing a globally connected data currency, which comes back to cryptocurrencies, and a global digital currency will definitely be the form we're moving towards, because the internet doesn't recognize countries' borders. How do you regulate something that doesn't recognize borders? This is going to be a challenge for the next decade, particularly for governments and regulators. And it's just the beginning. And that I surprised myself because I'm a big fan of science fiction, as I'm sure many of you were. In fact, when I walked into the room, I thought I was here to see Thor Ragnarok, and then realized it's not a cinema, it's actually somewhere I've got to do a presentation. The Marvel stuff and the Star Wars stuff are all things that inspired me as I was growing up. And since I've been growing up, and I still don't think I've grown up, to be honest, most science fiction has become science fact. You know, and that when you look at Star Trek, for example, and I'm a big fan of Star Trek, more than Star Wars myself, I'm a Trekkie, you know, you never saw Captain Kirk pay for anything. So where's all the money gone? You know, it's like there is no money in the future. And again, being a fintech tourist, I know this because this was me on Mars. And I actually think that we're moving very quickly into a very different world where there's a little bit of machine inside the human because we can replace any body part with a better one. And particularly those who need those new parts, that's fantastic. But the idea in the future of having a Paralympics and a separate Olympics is probably going to go away because basically everybody can join in. And equally, there's going to be a little bit more human inside the machines, which is because we're creating robotics that are going to be friends. You know, we're already almost at that stage that we're at, like the film Her with Joaquin Phoenix, where it's more than just an operating system, it's a consciousness, it's our friend. You know, it's our partner if we're lonely. You know, a lot of old people who sit on their own at home are going to have robots as friends. That's a better world. You know, it's not scary. It's a better world. I saw a forecast the other day that a baby born in 2017 will live for 150 years because of life sciences. And imagine 150 years. You know, imagine a baby born in 1867. You know, that was the year that Abraham Lincoln was shot. You know, that's how long that baby has lived. Or imagine, you know, in 2167, what will be going on? And bearing in mind that life sciences can extend lives and that technology is getting rid of poverty and disease, you know, we're going to end up with this massive explosion of humanity. When I was born, there were 3 billion people on the planet. Today, there's 7.5 billion people. If everyone's living longer and doesn't have disease or poverty, which is the vision of the future, what are we going to do with them? Send them to Mars. You know, the vision of a multiplanetary species is something Elon Musk is pushing very hard. And he does believe that we'll colonize Mars by the year 2040, which is only 25 years away, under 25 years. So by 2040, we might have colonized Mars. And you kind of think he's a bit silly when he says this, or some people do. But then I look back 100 years ago and think, would you want to fly on this? 1917, that's what airplanes look like. And yet today, I can fly 4 continents, 7 countries in 6 days. I actually have done that recently. If I'd said that 100 years ago, people would have thought I was an idiot. But today I can do that. You know, Heathrow Airport is celebrating 70 years. This is Heathrow Airport 70 years ago. Well, it's not changed much. So in finality, we've been through 4 revolutions. The 5th is when we become a multiplanetary species, which I honestly think will happen, because inside humans, we have an innate need to explore. And we've explored nearly everything on Earth, so we're going to start exploring everything outside Earth. And in the science fiction programs, and Star Trek being the one that's my guiding light, the reason why there's no money in Star Trek, and the reason why Captain Luke Picard, in this case, pays for nothing, is that wealth is no longer the driver of humanity. It's the betterment of humanity that drives us. And Elon Musk is making that happen because he would like to die thinking that when we're a multiplanetary species with self-sustaining civilizations, then that's what will be our focus, the betterment of ourselves. Thank you very much.